I do want to talk for a moment here about question 3, which is maybe the question that I find the most confusing looking at it, because it seems so innocuous on the face of it that I immediately wonder, what am I missing? So, so far so good, seems great. People can grow their own food. What am I missing? Why do we need this question? Who has been bringing it up? Are there opponents, and are there unexpected consequences that could come from putting this in the Constitution? So that's 4 questions all at once. Take your pick of where to start, but I'd love to dig in a little bit on question 3.
I can start and try to take a crack at it. So I guess the first thing I'll ask is who was pushing for this? So you saw Representative Billy Bob Falkingham was the one who sponsored this current iteration that finally passed. But actually, Senator Craig Hickman from Winthrop, who is a organic farmer, he's not being a legislator, actually has sponsored previous iterations of this before. And he has talked about it coming from this 2010 federal court case on raw milk that said that people have no absolute right to consume or feed children any particular food. And so the concept there is simply, as we kind of said before, this idea that you do have a right to food, you have the ability to grow it and access it the way that you want. This question of who is opposing it, and you guys feel free to jump in if I'm missing things, because I'm sure I'm skipping over a little bit. There has been some concern from animal welfare activists. The Humane Society of the United States was opposed to it because they had concerns that it could prevent future animal welfare restrictions or lead poachers to challenge hunting laws in court, which actually makes me want to back up a little bit and talk about one of the challenges about this amendment is that because it's so broad, it's kind of difficult to really understand what it could do in the future. I think I mentioned earlier that it's this idea that it could give people standing, and I think the intention is to be so broad in a sense that courts can kind of take it and shape it as they will. So the concerns that the Humane Society has, opponents would make the kind of argument that the law amendment specifically says that the freedom to access does not transcend or is not eligible to people who trespass, steal, poach, or violate other laws. Obviously, the state, the USDA have very specific regulations, at least when it comes to animal processing, I think is the correct term around it. So I do not believe you would just be allowed to slaughter animals in any way, shape, or form. Folks can, of course, correct me if they think that that's different or if I'm missing some element of food processing regulation.
Mentioned earlier about sort of this idea around food sovereignty, which is not a concept that I was familiar with prior to looking into this question. I wonder if you wanted to say a little bit more about that.
My basic understanding is that it would allow cities and towns to kind of break away from certain state food safety laws for goods that are prepared and sold within their borders specifically. The kind of this idea that your local farmer, so what their kind of practices are, and if you feel like you can talk to them and make that understanding, then why shouldn't you be able to buy something that you understand how they made? That law was the original food sovereignty law was passed in 2017. That's a little bit before my time here, so the debate around that I don't know too much about.
Going back, I guess, more a decade or so, there was a pretty healthy debate in the state over raw milk and farmers' ability to sell things straight from their farms. You can go out and buy potatoes from your local farmer, but there were farmers that were wanted to sell raw milk, and the state stepped in, and I believe this was during the Baldacci administration, might have been the LePage administration, stepped in and really kind of to tighten the rules on some of these farms, because there is I'm sure there are folks who will disagree, but there's a perception there's a certain amount of risk, with raw milk. and that the state wanted to make sure that these products were still being safe, when they're going out to folks. But so that sparked this dialogue and this push in Maine for food sovereignty, where it seemed to really start along in some of the coastal mid-coast towns like Blue Hill Peninsula area. You saw all these towns start to take up these local food sovereignty issues, where they were trying to assert themselves, and say the federal government doesn't have the right to tell us what Caitlin's saying, doesn't have the right to tell us and our local residents where they can buy their food. And it's kind of grown since then. This would be the first constitutional amendment for food sovereignty in the nation. And kind of what Caitlin was talking about is that because we're the first, and the language is not very clear, it's up to a lot of interpretation, that the courts are probably going to be the ones that are going to help define what this means. And that causes a lot of angst among some farmers, among, animal welfare groups. So that's the big concern. It looks like Rob wanted to chime in as well on some of the food sovereignty background.
Sure. Yeah, I just note it's a really diverse and broad coalition that has supported this across the state. So we mentioned Billy Bob Fockingham, Senator Craig Hickman. Those are really, really different politicians with a really different base and a really different policy platform. The 2017 piece of legislation, the Maine Food Sovereignty Act, was, how often do you get to say this, sponsored by Senator Troy Jackson and signed into law by Paul LePage. And there was a lot of grassroots mobilization on it. So I think the language of sovereignty appeals to some people in terms of this like anti-regulatory, get government off of my back sort of libertarian sentiment, whereas others are viewing food sovereignty more through the lens of community solidarity and coming together in like a really different framework. So I think maybe to the credit of those who were the drivers behind this amendment, they've built a broad coalition, and we've seen support and kind of strange bedfellows in terms of the people coming out to support the different iterations of this broader food sovereignty movement in its various stages. A joint resolution in 2011, all of these local municipal ordinances, the 2017 piece of legislation, and now here we are with a constitutional amendment.
Just one additional thing on some of the opposition, and there were animal welfare groups. There were some farmers that came out, especially larger farmers that came out in opposition. Some in the legislature that are farmers that voted against this because they were raising concerns about it. On the animal welfare side, in addition to the Humane Society, I believe the State Veterinary Association also raised concerns about whether this could interfere with the humane treatment of farm animals if it allowed people to kind of take things into their own hands and not follow those very strict guidelines when it comes to slaughtering and processing animals, and it could actually lead to more abuse. There were attempts, as I understand it, to correct and to address some of those concerns. One of the other things that's come up throughout this, when you're talking about agriculture, big ag, you have like companies like Monsanto that have patents on their seeds, and so you're not technically allowed to use, you're not supposed to use those seeds year after year. You're supposed to buy it from them every year because it's patented, restricted. It's they've developed it, they've specialized, with all kinds of things to prevent pests. The supporters of the food sovereignty, question 3, say that won't interfere. This will not interfere with those because of the language that talks about you're not allowed to violate other people's personal property or laws. That this is not going to allow Mainers to go out and to all of a sudden take advantage of, to do things with patented protected seeds that they were not allowed to do earlier. So just wanted to add that.
A couple of folks have asked about how question 3 could impact things like local zoning laws that could preclude people from keeping larger garden plots or having livestock in their yards. Or I think one person said, could you keep a horse in your apartment with this? But how would it impact those type of local laws?
I think it's really hard to say. And that's one of the frustrations with this. So it might give folks legal standing to challenge decisions made at the local level. For instance, I know many communities in well, throughout Maine have had ordinances about having, poultry within certain residential areas, right? So do you want your neighbor to have a rooster? Or do you want them to raise chickens with all of that, all of the negative externalities that that might entail? And cities and towns have kind of gone both ways on that. And I don't know that, because this is so vague, because the language is so broad, I don't know that the passage of this or the successful votes of this would result in any immediate changes, but it might give those who have a grievance with the decision by their local town or city some sort of standing to challenge it.
We had one question here that would this require the state to pay for food for consumers who need it? Or, according to certain nutrition requirements. I mean, is this a right to food? Or is it just a right to produce food?
That concern has kind of come up in this debate, and there was a fear that this could allow somebody who, able-bodied person to basically go to their town office and say, I have a right to food, you need to give me food for free. The supporters of this, of question 3, have said, no, that's not the way it's worded, that's not the intent of this, and that's not what's going to happen. And it's no different than, than somebody, saying, going out and demanding other things from your local government that technically you have a right to, but the local government or the state government does not guarantee that those things are going to be provided to you for free. So that issue has come up, but the supporters say that that's kind of a red herring. That's not going to be an issue. And I think one other thing that's really, we've heard so little about question 3. I was just looking it up, and maybe Rob or Caitlin know, but I was looking on the spending for this, and there has been no money spent pretty much on either side of this. So when you have something that is, not only is getting overshadowed by question 3, but there's very little discussion of it. I'll be curious to see how it goes, because it is very, the wording is talking about a natural and inherent and inalienable right to food. Well, that's something I think most people would, of course you have a right to food.